The gunshot echoed across the open plains, jerking Katherine Evans from her daydream. She stood frozen on the boardwalk of Silver Creek, Montana, her basket of supplies clutched tightly against her chest. It wasn't unusual to hear gunfire in 1867, but something about this particular shot made her blood run cold. Through the settling dust at the far end of the main street, a lone figure on horseback appeared, slumped slightly in the saddle. Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs as the rider drew closer. The townspeople parted like water around stones, their whispers rising up around her. "That's Heath Mitchell," someone murmured. "Thought he died at Gettysburg." The name struck Katherine like a physical blow. Heath Mitchell. The boy who had promised to come back for her before riding off to war 4 years ago. The boy whose letters had stopped coming 2 years back, leading everyone to believe he'd perished on some distant battlefield. The boy she'd mourned and eventually tried to forget. But Heath Mitchell wasn't a boy anymore. As his horse trudged wearily down the main street, Katherine could see the changes war had wrought. His once smooth face was now weathered, a jagged scar running from his right temple down to his jaw, disappearing into the scruff of his beard. His shoulders, broader than she remembered, carried the invisible weight of everything he'd seen. His eyes, once bright with mischief and promise, now scanned the street with the wariness of a man who had learned to expect danger from every corner. When those eyes found her, Katherine forgot how to breathe. Heath pulled his horse to a stop directly in front of her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the years between them filled with unspoken words. The townsfolk had gone silent, watching the reunion unfold like a play on a stage. "Katherine," he said finally, his voice deeper and rougher than she remembered. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. This ghost from her past had materialized in flesh and blood, and she had no idea what to do with the storm of emotions his presence unleashed. Heath dismounted slowly, wincing slightly as his boots hit the dirt. Up close, Katherine could see more scars, a small one above his left eyebrow, another peeking out from his collar. His right hand, once nimble enough to pluck any tune on a guitar, now looked stiff and bore the marks of a severe burn. "They told me you were dead," she whispered, finding her voice at last. "I nearly was." His eyes never left her face. More than once. Katherine became aware of her racing heart, of the spectators watching their every move, of the years that stretched between who they had been and who they were now. She became aware of Judge Parker's son, Harold, who had been calling on her these past 6 months, who had hinted at marriage just last Sunday after church. But most of all, she became aware of the love that had never truly died, that had simply lain dormant, waiting for this impossible moment. She stepped forward, her supplies forgotten as the basket tumbled to the ground. Her hands, trembling slightly, reached up to cup Heath's face, feeling the unfamiliar texture of his scars beneath her fingertips. And then, heedless of the gasps and murmurs of the onlookers, Katherine rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. She kissed him like the war had never happened, like the scars weren't there, like he was still the carefree boy who had taught her to ride and danced with her under the stars. She kissed him like her heart had never broken, and in that moment, she knew it had only been waiting to be made whole again. When they finally broke apart, Heath's good hand cradled the back of her head, his fingers tangled in her chestnut hair. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for a single day." Katherine smiled through her tears. "Welcome home, Heath Mitchell." The commotion around them grew as the townsfolk approached with questions and greetings. But for Katherine and Heath, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, a man forever changed by war, and the woman who saw beyond his scars to the heart that remained true. Miss Evans. The sharp voice of Millicent Harper, the town's self-appointed guardian of propriety, cut through the moment. "What on earth do you think you're doing, carrying on like that in the middle of the street?" Katherine didn't turn away from Heath's gaze as she replied, "Welcoming home a hero, Mrs. Harper, and the man I intend to marry." The declaration surprised even herself, but as soon as the words left her mouth, Katherine knew they were true. Whatever had happened to Heath, whatever demons he carried back from the war, she would face them with him. "Katherine," Heath said softly, doubt creeping into his expression, "you don't know what I've become, what I've done." "I know enough," she replied firmly. "The rest you can tell me in your own time." A commotion at the other end of the street drew their attention. Judge Parker and his son Harold were making their way toward them, the latter's face flushed with anger. "This reunion may not be as simple as you hope," Heath murmured, his body tensing as he recognized the approaching conflict. Katherine slipped her hand into his scarred one, intertwining their fingers. "Nothing worth having ever is." The sun beat down mercilessly as Harold Parker strode toward them, his expensive boots kicking up dust with each determined step. At 32, he was a decade older than Katherine and Heath, with the entitled air of a man who had never been told no in his life. "Katherine," Harold said, tipping his hat, but keeping his cold eyes fixed on Heath. "I see our town has an unexpected visitor." "Harold," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "This is Heath Mitchell. He's returned from the war." "Mitchell," Harold repeated, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The stable boy's son who fancied himself a soldier. We all thought you were dead." Heath's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "Sorry to disappoint you, Parker." Judge Parker, a more reasonable man than his son, stepped forward with an extended hand. "Any man who served the Union is welcome in Silver Creek. Your father would have been proud to see you home, son." Heath shook the offered hand. "Thank you, sir." "I was sorry to hear about his passing. Pneumonia took him hard and fast last winter," the judge explained. "But he never gave up hope of your return, kept your room just as you left it." Katherine watched the emotions play across Heath's face: grief for his father, gratitude for the judge's kindness, and wariness toward Harold, whose possessive gaze kept returning to her. "Katherine and I were about to have supper," Harold interjected, reaching for her arm. "Perhaps you'd like to join us, Mitchell. You can tell us all about your adventures." Before Katherine could respond, the town doctor pushed through the growing crowd. "If you'll excuse me," Dr. Wilson said, his experienced eyes already assessing Heath's condition. "I think Mr. Mitchell here could use some medical attention before any social engagements. That wound on your side is bleeding through your shirt, young man." Heath glanced down, seeming surprised to see the spreading red stain on his left side. "It's nothing. Took a fall from my horse a few days back." "Stitches must have torn." "Nothing, he says," Dr. Wilson scoffed. "Come along to my office. The welcome party can wait until you're not bleeding all over Main Street." Katherine felt a surge of concern. "I'll come with you." "That won't be necessary, Miss Evans," Dr. Wilson assured her. "And hardly proper. I'm sure Mr. Mitchell will find you once he's patched up." Harold seized the opportunity, placing a proprietary hand on Katherine's shoulder. "Perfect timing. We can still make our dinner reservation at the hotel." Katherine hesitated, torn between propriety and her desire to stay with Heath. Their eyes met over the doctor's shoulder, and she saw both understanding and resignation in his gaze. "Go on," Heath said softly. "I've waited 4 years to see you again. A few more hours won't kill me." "You promise you'll find me afterward?" Katherine asked, ignoring Harold's increasingly impatient stance beside her. Heath's lips curved into a ghost of his old smile, transforming his scarred face into something achingly familiar. "Wild horses couldn't stop me. As doctor, Wilson led Heath away toward his office at the end of the street. Katherine reluctantly allowed Harold to guide her toward the Silver Creek Hotel. But her mind remained with the wounded soldier who had returned against all odds and the uncertain future that awaited them both. The Silver Creek Hotel dining room hummed with conversation and the clink of silverware against fine china. Katherine sat across from Harold, barely touching the roast beef on her plate as he droned on about the latest property he had acquired. Her thoughts kept drifting to Heath, wondering what other wounds, visible and invisible, he had brought home from the war. "Katherine," Harold said sharply, drawing her attention back to him. "You haven't heard a word I've said." "I'm sorry," she replied automatically. "I'm a bit distracted tonight." Harold set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Because of Mitchell. Really, Katherine, I understand the excitement of seeing an old friend returned from the dead, so to speak, but your display in the street was most inappropriate." Heat rose to Katherine's cheeks. "Heath is more than an old friend." "Was," Harold corrected. "Whatever childish attachment you may have had before the war is hardly relevant now. You're 22 years old, Katherine. It's time to think about your future sensibly." "And you believe you're my sensible future?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Harold smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I can provide for you in ways Mitchell never could. My father's position, my business interests you would want for nothing as my wife." "Except love," Katherine said quietly, withdrawing her hand. Harold's expression hardened. "Love is a luxury, Katherine. Security is a necessity, especially for a woman in your position." Katherine knew what he meant. After her parents died in a smallpox outbreak 3 years ago, she had been living on borrowed time in the small house her father had built. Teaching at the local school provided enough for basic necessities, but the security Harold offered was tempting, or had been, before today. "Heath loved me enough to come back," she said, meeting Harold's gaze steadily. "And what exactly does he have to offer you now?" Harold countered. "A crippled war veteran with no prospects, no family, and from what I could see, more scars than sound flesh. Be reasonable, Katherine. The boy you knew died on some battlefield back east. Whatever returned is just a shadow." Katherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I won't sit here and listen to you speak about him that way." Harold glanced around at the curious faces turning their way. "Sit down," he hissed. "You're making a scene." "I'm leaving," she corrected him. "Thank you for dinner, Harold, but I think it's best if you stop calling on me. Whatever understanding you thought we had, it's over." Harold's face flushed with anger as she turned to leave. "He won't stay, you know," he called after her, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "Men like that can't settle anymore. The war breaks something in them. He'll leave again, Katherine, and where will you be then?" Katherine paused at the door, looking back at him with quiet dignity. "Then at least I'll have loved truly once in my life." The night air was cool against her heated cheeks as she stepped onto the hotel porch. The main street of Silver Creek was quieter now, most businesses closed for the evening. Lanterns glowed in windows, and the distant piano music from the saloon drifted on the breeze. Katherine stood for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She could see lights still burning in Dr. Wilson's window down the street. Without allowing herself to hesitate, she lifted her skirts and made her way toward it. The doctor's assistant, a young woman named Maggie, opened the door at Katherine's knock. "Miss Evans," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "The doctor is just finishing up with Mr. Mitchell." "May I wait for him?" Katherine asked. Maggie hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the back room. "It's not really proper, please," Katherine interrupted. "I've known Heath since we were children. I just want to make sure he's all right." Something in her expression must have convinced Maggie, who stepped aside with a small smile. "Wait in the front room. I'll let the doctor know you're here." Katherine settled onto a wooden chair, hands folded in her lap. The walls of Dr. Wilson's waiting room were lined with medical texts and bottles of various remedies. A clock ticked steadily on the mantel, marking the minutes that stretched into nearly an hour. Finally, the door to the examination room opened, and Dr. Wilson emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked tired but not overly concerned. "Miss Evans," he acknowledged, "I should have known you'd turn up sooner or later." "How is he?" she asked, rising to her feet. The doctor sighed. "Physically, he'll heal. That wound in his side wasn't deep, but it was infected. I've cleaned and stitched it properly now. He has a few other injuries that need attention: an old bullet wound in his shoulder that never healed right, burns on his right hand that have limited his mobility." "And beyond the physical," Katherine pressed. Dr. Wilson's expression grew grave. "That's not so easily diagnosed or treated. He's seen things, Miss Evans, done things. War changes a man." "But he's still Heath," she insisted. "Parts of him, yes," the doctor agreed. "But you need to be prepared. He may have nightmares, bouts of melancholy or anger. The wounds we can't see often take the longest to heal, if they ever do." Katherine nodded, absorbing this sobering information. "May I see him now?" "Briefly," Dr. Wilson conceded. "He needs rest, but I think seeing you might do him some good. He asked about you several times while I was working." The doctor led her to the back room, where Heath lay on a narrow bed, his torso wrapped in bandages. He was shirtless, allowing Katherine to see the full extent of what the war had done to him. Besides the prominent scar on his face, his chest and arms bore the marks of his service: a puckered bullet wound near his left shoulder, long healed but still angry looking. The burn scars that covered much of his right forearm and hand. Countless smaller nicks and scars that told stories she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Heath's eyes were closed, his breathing deep and even. Dr. Wilson had given him laudanum for the pain, Maggie explained in a whisper before discreetly withdrawing to give them privacy. Katherine moved quietly to the bedside chair. Up close, with the grime of travel washed away, Heath looked both familiar and strange. The boy she had loved was still there in the curve of his lips, the angle of his jaw. But the man he had become carried the weight of experiences she could barely imagine. She reached out hesitantly, her fingertips lightly tracing the scar on his face. At her touch, Heath's eyes flew open, his hand instinctively grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. For a terrifying moment, he didn't seem to recognize her, his eyes wild with some remembered danger. "Heath," she said softly, "it's me, Katherine. You're safe." Recognition dawned, and he immediately released her, shame washing over his features. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice raspy. "Sometimes I forget where I am." "It's all right," she assured him, reclaiming her seat but keeping her hands in her lap this time. "How are you feeling?" A humorless smile curved his lips. "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo. Doc says I've been riding around with an infected wound for days. Says I'm lucky to be alive." "You seem to have made a habit of that," Katherine observed, Heath's expression sobered. "Not by choice. Plenty of better men didn't make it back." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of all that remained unsaid hovering between them. "I saw your father's grave," Heath finally said. "Stopped by the cemetery on my way into town. Your mother's too. I'm sorry, Kat, I should have been here." The old nickname, unused for so long, brought tears to her eyes. "You couldn't have known. You were fighting your own battles." "I stopped writing," he said, guilt evident in his voice. "After Gettysburg, I just couldn't find the words anymore. And then when I was captured," Katherine interrupted, her heart constricting at the thought. "You were a prisoner," Heath nodded, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. "Andersonville, for 14 months. Katherine had read about the notorious Confederate prison in Georgia. The accounts of starvation, disease, and death had horrified the nation. "Oh, Heath," she whispered, understanding now some of the gauntness in his face, the shadows in his eyes. "I didn't want you to wait for a ghost," he continued. "I figured if you thought I was dead, you could move on, be happy." "And yet here you are," she said. His eyes found hers, vulnerability evident in their depths. "I had to see you once more, even if just to make sure you were all right." "I didn't expect." He trailed off, his scarred hand making a helpless gesture. "Didn't expect what?" "That kiss," he admitted. "The way you looked at me, like you were seeing through all of this." His hand motioned to his scarred face and body. "Like you were seeing the boy I used to be." Katherine reached for his hand again, this time slowly enough that he didn't startle. She traced the ridged scars on his palm, feeling the stiffness in his fingers as they curled reflexively around hers. "I see both," she told him honestly. "The boy I loved and the man who survived to come back to me. They're both you, Heath." He shook his head slightly. "I'm not the same person who left, Kat. The things I've seen, the things I've done." "None of us are the same," she countered. "Life changed me too. But what matters is what's in here." She placed her free hand gently over his heart, feeling its steady beat beneath her palm. "And I believe that hasn't changed." Heath covered her hand with his own, his eyes never leaving hers. "I still love you," he confessed, the words seeming to be wrenched from somewhere deep inside him. "God help me, I never stopped. But I have nothing to offer you now. No home, no prospects. Just a broken-down ex-soldier with more nightmares than dreams." "Let me decide what I want," Katherine said firmly. "I've spent too much time letting others make my choices for me. My parents, the town, Harold Parker," Heath interrupted, his expression darkening. "He seems to think he has some claim on you." Katherine withdrew her hands, straightening in her chair. "He's been calling on me. He's proposed in his way." The flash of pain in Heath's eyes was quickly masked. "He can give you security, a good life." "A life without love," she corrected. "I already told him no." Hope and doubt warred in Heath's expression. "Because of me. Kat, don't throw away a chance at a decent future on some childhood memory." "I'm not," she assured him. "I'm making a choice for myself based on what I want. And what I want, Heath Mitchell, is a chance to know the man you've become. To see if what we feel for each other is strong enough to build a future on." The door opened before Heath could respond, Dr. Wilson returning with a stern expression. "That's enough visiting for tonight, Miss Evans. My patient needs rest, and you need to get home before your reputation is completely in tatters." Katherine rose reluctantly. "I'll come back tomorrow," Heath nodded, fatigue evident in the lines of his face. "I'll be here. Doc says I'm not to move for at least 2 days." "Smart man, your doctor," Katherine smiled, impulsively leaning down to press a gentle kiss to Heath's forehead. "Rest well," she whispered. As she turned to leave, Heath caught her hand one last time. "Kat," he said softly, "thank you for seeing me." The simple gratitude in his voice nearly broke her heart. "Always," she promised before following Dr. Wilson from the room. Outside, the doctor walked her to the edge of town, insisting it wasn't safe for a young woman to be out alone after dark. "He needs time to heal, Miss Evans," he cautioned as they walked. "Not just physically." "I know," Katherine replied, "and I'll give him that time, but I won't give up on him." Dr. Wilson studied her face in the moonlight. "Your parents would be proud of the woman you've become," he said finally. "Stubborn as your father and kind-hearted as your mother." Katherine smiled at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you for taking care of him, doctor." "It's what I do," he replied simply. "Now go home and get some rest yourself. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As Katherine walked the short distance to her small house at the edge of town, She found herself filled with a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. Heath had returned, scarred and changed, but still hers in all the ways that mattered. Whatever difficulties lay ahead, she would face them by his side if he would let her. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Catherine's kitchen as she prepared a basket of food for Heath. Fresh biscuits, cold chicken from last night's supper, and apple preserves, simple fare, but nourishing. As she worked, her mind wandered to the conversations they would need to have, the past 4 years that had transformed them both. A firm knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Wiping her hands on her apron, Katherine opened it to find Harold Parker standing on her porch, looking immaculate in a tailored suit despite the early hour. "Harold," she greeted him, making no move to invite him inside. "Katherine." He removed his hat, revealing carefully combed hair. "I came to apologize for my behavior last night. It was unworthy of me." She regarded him warily. "Apology accepted. Is there anything else?" Harold's gaze moved past her to the basket on the kitchen table. "Planning a picnic." "I'm bringing food to Heath at the doctor's office," she said honestly, seeing no reason to pretend. Harold's jaw tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Of course. Charitable as always, Katherine. May I come in for a moment? What I have to say isn't for the ears of passers-by." Reluctantly, Katherine stepped aside to allow him entry, leaving the door conspicuously open. Harold took a seat at her kitchen table uninvited, placing his hat beside him. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began, folding his hands on the table. "And I believe I can offer a solution that would benefit everyone." "My situation," Katherine echoed, remaining standing. "Your financial circumstances," Harold clarified. "The school board has been discussing the need for additional teachers, given the town's growth. As chairman, I could ensure you receive a permanent position with increased compensation." Katherine crossed her arms. "In exchange for what?" "Nothing improper," Harold assured her smoothly. "Simply your agreement to consider my proposal with an open mind. Take some time, perhaps a month, to thoroughly evaluate your options before making any hasty decisions regarding Mitchell." "You're trying to buy time," Katherine realized. "You think if I wait, Heath will leave or I'll come to my senses." Harold's expression hardened slightly. "I think you're allowing sentimentality to cloud your judgment. Mitchell is damaged goods, Katherine. Even if he stays, what kind of life could he offer you? A crippled veteran's pension and a lifetime of nursing his wounds, both physical and mental." "You don't know him," Katherine said quietly. "I know men who have come back from war," Harold countered. "My cousin returned from Shiloh a shell of himself, couldn't hold a job, took to the bottle. His wife left after a year of hell. That's the future waiting for you with Mitchell." Katherine's temper flared. "Get out." Harold blinked, genuinely surprised by her vehemence. "Katherine, get out of my house," she repeated, her voice steady despite her anger. "I won't be bribed or frightened into abandoning Heath. And I certainly won't be marrying you, Harold Parker, not in a month or ever." Harold rose slowly, his expression cold. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was thinking you were a gentleman," Katherine replied, holding the door wider. "Good day." After Harold left, Katherine leaned against the closed door, her heart racing with indignation. His warnings about Heath's future troubled her more than she wanted to admit, not because she believed them, but because she knew Heath himself might. With renewed determination, she finished packing the basket and set out for Dr. Wilson's office. The doctor's waiting room was empty when she arrived, save for Maggie, who looked up from her bookkeeping with a smile. "He's been asking about you," the young woman confided. "Woke up at dawn wanting to know when visiting hours started." Katherine returned the smile, her spirits lifting. "Is he well enough for company now?" Doctor says he can have visitors, but no excitement, Maggie warned, rising to lead her back. His fever broke overnight, which is a good sign. The infection's receding. Heath was sitting up in bed when Katherine entered, a day's growth of beard darkening his jaw. He looked better than he had the previous night. Some color had returned to his face, and his eyes were clearer. He'd managed to put on a clean shirt, though it hung unbuttoned, revealing the fresh bandages beneath. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. Katherine set the basket on the bedside table. "I brought breakfast. Dr. Wilson said you needed to regain your strength." "Been telling me I'm too skinny," Heath confirmed, eyeing the basket with interest. "Said I need to put on 20 pounds before I'd make a decent scarecrow." Katherine laughed, settling into the chair beside his bed. As she unpacked the food, the easy conversation she'd planned deserted her. There was so much to say, so much lost time to account for, that she hardly knew where to begin. Heath seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Start at the beginning," he suggested gently. "Tell me what happened after I left. Tell me about your parents." So she did. Over fresh biscuits and preserves, Katherine told him about the last 4 years, her father's pride when her teaching position was announced, her mother's final weeks during the smallpox outbreak, the quiet grief that followed. She told him about taking over their small house, about her students at the school, about the small-town gossip and changes that marked the passing of time. Heath listened intently, asking questions that showed he remembered the details of her life before the names of childhood friends, her favorite fishing spot by the creek, her mother's famous apple pies that Katherine had never quite mastered. "Your turn," she said finally, when the food was gone and the morning had stretched toward noon. "Tell me what happened to you, Heath. The real story, not the polite version." Heath's expression sobered. He looked down at his scarred hand, flexing the stiff fingers slowly. "It's not a pretty tale, Kat." "I don't need pretty," she assured him. "I need true." He nodded, drew a deep breath, and began. He told her about the initial excitement of joining the Union Army, the camaraderie of training, the swift education in the realities of war at First Bull Run. He described the long marches, the hunger, the tedium punctuated by moments of sheer terror. He told her about friends made and lost in quick succession, until he learned not to get too attached to the men beside him. "Gettysburg was where it all changed," he said, his voice dropping so low Katherine had to lean forward to hear him. 3 days of hell on earth. I took a bullet here." He touched his left shoulder on the second day. "Should have put me out of the fight, but there was no time for that. Too many men falling, too many gaps to fill." He described the chaos of Pickett's charge on the 3rd day, how he'd been positioned with the Union forces that repelled the Confederate assault. "I killed men I could see clearly enough to describe their faces," he said, his expression haunted. "Watched the light go out in their eyes, some no older than 16, some old enough to be my father." Katherine reached for his hand, holding it firmly as he continued. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't write to you anymore," he admitted. "Couldn't find words that wouldn't soil the paper they were written on. And then came the Wilderness Campaign, and that's when," he gestured to his face, "this happened. Artillery shell exploded too close. Piece of shrapnel caught me. I was lucky. The man next to me lost his head entirely." Katherine flinched but didn't interrupt. "Got captured at Cold Harbor," Heath continued. "That was June of '64. Ended up at Andersonville by July." His description of the prison camp was sparse but devastating: the overcrowding, the starvation, the disease that ran rampant through the stockade. He told her how he'd nearly died of dysentery, how he'd watched men he'd come to call friends waste away to nothing, how he'd traded his wedding ring, his father's. kept as a good luck charm for a moldy crust of bread during the worst of the hunger. My hand got burned when our shelter caught fire, he explained, looking down at the scarred appendage. Several of us were trapped. I pulled 2 men out before the flames got too bad, couldn't save the third. By the time he finished his account, ending with his release after the war's conclusion and the long, difficult journey home, Catherine's cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. I came back because I had nowhere else to go, Heath confessed. And because, even after everything, I needed to know if you were all right, I never expected. He trailed off, his gaze dropping to their intertwined hands. Never expected what? Katherine prompted softly. To find you waiting, he finished. To find you still caring for me after all this time. Katherine squeezed his hand. I mourned you when I thought you were dead, but some part of me never fully accepted it. Some part of me kept waiting. I'm not the same man who left, Heath warned again. The things I've seen, the things I've done, they change a person, Kat. Sometimes I wake up and don't recognize myself. Then we'll get to know who you are now, she said simply. Day by day. Heath studied her face, searching for doubt or hesitation and finding none. What about Parker? He won't take kindly to being set aside. Catherine's expression hardened slightly. Harold Parker has already made his feelings known. He came to my house this morning trying to bribe me with a teaching position in exchange for giving you up. Heath's jaw tightened. He's got nerve. He has influence, Katherine corrected. And that makes him dangerous in his way. He's the type of man who doesn't like losing what he considers his property. You're not property, Heath said fiercely. Katherine smiled. I know that, you know that. Harold may need some convincing. Before Heath could respond, Dr. Wilson appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of exasperation and resignation. Miss Evans, I believe I mentioned no excitement as a condition of these visits. We were just talking, Doctor, Katherine assured him. And now you're done, the doctor replied firmly. Mr. Mitchell needs rest if he's to recover enough to leave my care any time soon. Katherine rose obediently, gathering the remnants of their meal back into her basket. I'll come back tomorrow. Heath nodded, his eyes conveying everything his words couldn't in the doctor's presence. I'll be counting the hours. As Katherine turned to leave, Dr. Wilson cleared his throat pointedly. Miss Evans, a word before you go. In the hallway, the doctor's expression grew serious. I couldn't help overhearing parts of your conversation. Mitchell has been through a great deal. I know, Katherine acknowledged. What you may not fully understand is the long-term impact of such experiences, Dr. Wilson continued. The wounds of the mind don't heal like those of the body. I've seen men returned from war who seemed fine at first, only to fall apart months later. Nightmares, violent outbursts, melancholia so deep they take their own lives. Katherine paled at his blunt assessment. Are you saying that will happen to Heath? I'm saying it could, the doctor clarified. And if you're planning a future with him, you need to be prepared for that possibility. It won't be easy, Miss Evans. Loving a man damaged by war requires extraordinary strength and patience. Katherine straightened her shoulders. Then I'll find that strength, Doctor. Wilson studied her for a moment before nodding slightly. Perhaps you will. God knows the boy deserves someone in his corner after what he's been through. He patted her arm awkwardly. Come back tomorrow afternoon. If all goes well, I may release him to your care the day after. My care. Katherine repeated, surprised. Unless you'd prefer he stay with Harold Parker, the doctor asked with the ghost of a smile. Katherine laughed despite herself. No, that wouldn't do at all. Thank you, doctor. As she walked home, Katherine's mind raced with practical considerations. Heath would need somewhere to stay. His father's house had been sold after his death to cover debts. The new owners a family from back east who had renovated it extensively. Her own small home had only 2 bedrooms, hers and the one that had belonged to her parents, now used for storage. More importantly, there was the matter of propriety. A single woman couldn't simply invite a man to live in her home, no matter the circumstances. The town would be scandalized, her reputation ruined. By the time she reached her front porch, Katherine had made her decision. Heath would stay in her parents' old room, but not without proper chaperoning. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly widow who lived next door, had been looking for ways to supplement her meager income. Perhaps she could be persuaded to move in temporarily, providing both household help and the appearance of propriety. As for the long term, that would depend on Heath, on his recovery, on the decisions they would make together about their future. For now, it was enough to know he was alive, and that the love they had shared as youths had somehow survived the crucible of war and time. Katherine spent the rest of the day clearing out her parents' bedroom, packing away the remaining clothes and personal items into trunks that she stored in the attic. She aired out the mattress, changed the linens, and dusted the furniture until everything gleamed. By evening, the room was ready, simple but comfortable, with a view of the small garden her mother had once tended. After supper, she crossed the yard to Mrs. Abernathy's cottage, explaining the situation and making her proposal. The older woman, whose son had died at Antietam, agreed immediately, her rheumy eyes soft with understanding. "It's not right what war does to our boys," Mrs. Abernathy said, inviting Katherine in for tea. "My Thomas came back from the Mexican War changed, couldn't stand loud noises. Jumped at shadows, but he found his way back to himself eventually with patience and love." She patted Katherine's hand. "Your young man will too." "I hope so," Katherine replied. "Dr. Wilson says it won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is, Mrs. Abernathy," echoed Katherine's own words from the day before. "Now, tell me more about this Heath of yours. I remember him as a lanky boy who used to steal apples from Old Man Peterson's orchard." Katherine smiled, relieved to have found an ally, as she described Heath to Mrs. Abernathy, both the boy he had been and the man he had become. She felt her resolve strengthening. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next day dawned bright and clear, a perfect Montana spring morning. Katherine spent it at the school, teaching her students with one eye on the clock, counting the hours until she could visit Heath again. When the children were finally dismissed, she hurried home to change into a fresh dress before making her way to Dr. Wilson's office. She was halfway there when a commotion near the saloon caught her attention. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in anger. Katherine quickened her pace, an inexplicable sense of dread settling in her stomach. As she drew closer, she could make out Heath's tall figure at the center of the crowd, facing off against Harold Parker and several of his friends. Heath was dressed in his own clothes again, standing straight despite the obvious pain it caused him, his expression hard as granite. "Don't belong here anymore, Mitchell," Harold was saying as Katherine pushed her way through the onlookers. "Silver Creek has changed since you left. We don't need your kind stirring up trouble." "My kind," Heath replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what kind is that exactly?" Harold smirked. "Broken-down war relics with nothing to offer but bad memories and worse prospects." A murmur ran through the crowd, some in agreement, others in disapproval. Katherine finally broke through to the front, moving immediately to Heath's side. "That's enough, Harold," she said firmly. Harold's eyes narrowed at her appearance. "This doesn't concern you, Katherine." "Anything that concerns Heath concerns me," she replied, slipping her hand into Heath's. She felt his fingers tighten around hers, drawing strength from her presence. "So it's like that, is it?" Harold said, his voice hardening. "You're choosing this scarred-up nobody over a future with me." "He's not a nobody," Katherine retorted. "He's a hero who fought for his country while you were safely counting your profits at home." Harold flushed angrily. "I served in my own way. Someone had to keep the town running, supply the war effort." "At triple the normal prices," someone in the crowd muttered, loud enough to be heard. Harold ignored the comment, focusing his attention on Heath. "You think you've won something here, Mitchell? You think she'll still want you when she sees what you really are? When the nightmares wake you screaming? When you can't hold a job because your hand's too crippled to be useful?" Heath's expression didn't change, but Katherine felt him tense beside her. "I've never pretended to be anything I'm not, Parker. Can you say the same?" Harold took a threatening step forward. "You'd best watch your mouth, cripple. I run this town now." "That's debatable," came a new voice as Judge Parker pushed through the crowd to stand beside his son. "Harold, what's the meaning of this public disturbance?" The older Parker looked tired and embarrassed by his son's behavior. Though he shared Harold's ambition, the judge had always conducted himself with a dignity his son lacked. "Just welcoming Mitchell home, Father," Harold replied, not backing down. "Letting him know how things stand." Judge Parker turned to Heath, his expression softening slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, I apologize for this unpleasantness. Whatever disagreements exist between you and my son, they should be handled privately, not as public spectacle." "No apology needed, Judge," Heath replied respectfully. "I was just leaving Dr. Wilson's office when your son and his friends decided to have this conversation." The judge nodded, turning a stern gaze on Harold. "Then I suggest you continue on your way, Mr. Mitchell. And Harold, I expect to see you at home, immediately." Harold's jaw worked as he struggled with his anger, but even he wouldn't openly defy his father. With a final glare at Heath and Katherine, he stalked off, his friends trailing behind him. The crowd began to disperse. The entertainment concluded. Katherine kept her hand firmly in Heath's as they walked away from the scene, heading instinctively toward her home. "You shouldn't have done that," Heath said once they were out of earshot of the remaining onlookers. "Parker's not a man to cross lightly." "Neither am I a woman to be intimidated," Katherine replied. "Besides, someone needed to stand up to him. He's gotten too used to people bowing to his money and influence." Heath's lips quirked in a small smile. "You always did have more courage than sense," says the man who just got out of a sick bed to confront the most powerful family in town, she countered, matching his smile with one of her own. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the tension of the confrontation gradually easing. As they approached Katherine's house, Heath slowed his pace. "Doc Wilson released me," he said. "Said I was well enough to leave his care, as long as I promised to rest and let the wounds finish healing." "I know," Katherine replied. "He told me yesterday he planned to, that's why I've been making arrangements." Heath raised an eyebrow. "Arrangements?" Katherine explained about clearing out her parents' room and Mrs. Abernathy's agreement to serve as chaperone. "It's not much," she concluded, suddenly uncertain. "But it would give you a place to stay while you recover, and time to figure out your next steps." Heath stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Kat, I can't impose on you like that. It's not an imposition," she insisted. It's what people do for those they care about." "The town will talk," Heath warned. "The town always talks," Katherine dismissed. "Mrs. Abernathy's presence will satisfy the proprieties." "And honestly, Heath, where else would you go?" He had no answer for that. His father's house belonged to strangers now, and while he had enough money saved from his army pay to stay at the hotel for a while, it wouldn't last forever. "Just until I'm back on my feet," he agreed finally. "Until I can find work and a place of my own." Katherine nodded, hiding her relief. Mrs. Abernathy is expecting us. She's prepared supper." As they continued toward her house, Heath asked, "Does she know about—" He gestured vaguely to his scars, his damaged hand. "She knows you've been through a war," Katherine said gently. "Her own husband came back changed from fighting in Mexico. She understands better than most." Heath nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Then I guess I'd better make a good impression on my new landlady." Mrs. Abernathy took to Heath immediately, clucking over his thinness and instructing him to sit while she served up a hearty stew with dumplings. She asked no probing questions about his war experiences, instead regaling him with town gossip and stories about Catherine's students, creating an atmosphere of normalcy that seemed to ease Heath's discomfort. After supper, Mrs. Abernathy announced she was retiring to her room, formerly Catherine's parents' bedroom, while Heath would take the small room that had once been Catherine's childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room. The arrangement left Katherine with the main bedroom, maintaining proper separation between the unmarried man and woman. "I've laid out fresh towels and soap," Mrs. Abernathy told Heath, "and there's a pitcher of water for washing up. If you need anything in the night, just knock on my door. I'm a light sleeper." With that, she bid them good night, leaving Heath and Katherine alone in the small sitting room. An awkward silence fell between them, the intimacy of the domestic setting highlighting the newness of their adult relationship. "Your Mrs. Abernathy is quite a character," Heath said finally, settling carefully into a chair by the fireplace. The day's exertions had clearly taken a toll. Lines of fatigue etched his face, and he moved with the stiffness of someone in pain. "She's been a good neighbor since my parents died," Katherine replied, taking the chair opposite him. "I don't know what I would have done without her these past few years." Heath's expression grew serious. "I should have been here for you." "You're here now," Katherine said simply. "That's what matters." They talked quietly for a while longer, the conversation easier than it had been at the doctor's office. Heath asked about her teaching, and Katherine described her 12 students, from 6-year-old Tommy Wilson, who could barely sit still for 5 minutes, to 15-year-old Mary Calhoun, who showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics. In turn, Katherine asked about Heath's plans now that he was home. "Have you thought about what you might want to do once you're fully recovered?" Heath looked down at his scarred hand, flexing the fingers thoughtfully. "I'm not sure what I can do with this. I used to be good with horses, breaking them, training them, but that takes 2 good hands and quick reflexes." "There are other options," Katherine suggested. "Silver Creek is growing. There's need for all sorts of skills." "Maybe," Heath conceded, though he didn't sound convinced. "The Army taught me to shoot straight at least. Could try my hand at hunting, trapping." Katherine nodded encouragingly, though the thought of him alone in the wilderness, far from help if his health failed, made her uneasy. "There's time to figure it out. No need to rush into anything." A comfortable silence fell between them. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the simple room. Outside, the night sounds of Silver Creek provided a soothing backdrop, distant piano music from the saloon, the occasional whinny of a horse, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees that lined the creek. "I still can't quite believe I'm here," Heath said finally, his voice soft with wonder. "There were so many times I thought I'd never see Montana again, never see you." Katherine met his gaze across the short distance between their chairs. "I used to dream you'd come home. Even after the letters stopped, even after they said you were dead, some part of me never gave up hope." Heath leaned forward, wincing slightly at the pull on his healing wound. "Kat, I need you to understand something. I meant what I said about not being the same man. There are days when I barely recognize myself. Days when the memories are so strong I can't tell what's real and what's not. I understand, she said quietly. No, you don't, Heath insisted, his expression pained. You can't, and I pray you never will, but you need to know that there might be bad days. Days when I'm not fit company for anyone. Days when the nightmares follow me into waking. Katherine rose from her chair and crossed to kneel beside his, taking his hands in hers, the whole left one and the scarred right. Then we'll face those days together, she said firmly. One at a time. Heath searched her face, looking for doubt or fear and finding only steadfast determination. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. Unlike their impulsive reunion on Main Street, this kiss was deliberate, a promise exchanged without words. When they parted, Heath rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed as if in prayer. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Good thing love isn't about deserving, Katherine replied, her heart full to bursting. It's about choosing, and I choose you, Heath Mitchell, scars and all. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 10, breaking the spell of the moment. Katherine reluctantly pulled away, aware of the proprieties they had promised to observe under Mrs. Abernathy's chaperonage. You should rest, she said, noting the lines of fatigue deepening around Heath's eyes. Doctor's orders. Heath nodded, rising stiffly from his chair. Good night, Kat. Good night, she replied, watching as he made his way down the short hallway to his room. Only when his door closed did she allow herself to release the breath she'd been holding, her fingers rising to touch her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight had given her hope. Not the naive hope of youth, but something stronger and more enduring, the hope that comes from facing difficult truths and choosing love anyway. Katherine was awakened in the deepest part of night by a hoarse cry from down the hall. Disoriented at first, she sat up in bed, her heart pounding as the sound came again, a man's voice, ragged with terror. Heath. She was out of bed in an instant, pulling on her robe as she hurried down the hallway. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at her own door, her gray hair in a nightcap, her expression concerned but knowing. Nightmares, the older woman said quietly. My Thomas had them too. Go to him, child. I'll make some tea. Katherine nodded gratefully, approaching Heath's door with trepidation. Another cry came from within, followed by the sound of thrashing. Heath, she called softly, knocking lightly. When no response came, she pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark save for the silver of moonlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. It illuminated Heath's form on the bed, the sheets tangled around him as he fought invisible enemies, his face contorted in fear and anguish. No, he muttered, his voice thick with sleep and terror. No, don't, they're just boys. Don't. Katherine approached cautiously, remembering how he had grabbed her wrist at the doctor's office. Heath, she called, louder this time. Heath, wake up, you're dreaming. His eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. For a terrible moment he looked at her without recognition, his hand reaching automatically for a weapon that wasn't there. It's Katherine, she said calmly, staying just out of reach. You're in Silver Creek. You're safe. Awareness slowly returned to his gaze. Heath sat up, running a shaking hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Kat, he rasped, his voice rough from shouting. I'm sorry, did I wake you? It's all right, she assured him, daring to move closer now that he was fully awake. You were having a nightmare. Heath closed his eyes, shame evident in every line of his body. This is why I shouldn't be here. I told you, you told me there would be bad days, Katherine interrupted, perching carefully on the edge of his bed. And I told you we would face them together. Heath looked up at her, moonlight catching the gleam of unshed tears in his eyes. I was back there, he whispered. At Cold Harbor. We were ordered to charge a position we all knew was suicide. So many men died in minutes, I can still hear their screams." Katherine reached for his hand, holding it firmly between both of hers. "They can't hurt you anymore," she said softly. "Those memories, they're in the past, are they?" Heath asked, his voice hollow. "Sometimes I think I never really left that battlefield. That part of me is still there, will always be there." Before Katherine could respond, Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with a steaming pot of tea and 3 cups. "Thought we could all use something soothing," she said matter-of-factly, as if midnight tea parties after war nightmares were a regular occurrence. "It's chamomile with a touch of honey. My Thomas swore by it." The older woman's practical approach seemed to center Heath, drawing him back from the edge of his dark memories. He straightened slightly, making an obvious effort to compose himself. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm sorry to have disturbed your rest." "Nonsense," she replied, setting the tray on the bedside table and pouring 3 cups. "Sleep is overrated at my age. Besides, good company is worth waking for." They sat together in the moonlit room, sipping tea and talking quietly. Mrs. Abernathy shared stories of her late husband's struggle with his own war memories, speaking with the wisdom of experience and the compassion of one who had walked a similar path. "Time helps," she told Heath. "Not to forget you never forget, but to make peace with it. To find a way to carry it without being crushed by the weight." "How?" Heath asked, the simple question containing worlds of pain and longing. Mrs. Abernathy smiled gently. "By remembering you're not alone. By letting people who love you help shoulder the burden. By finding purpose in the life you still have, rather than dwelling on what you've lost." She rose then, collecting the empty cups with practiced efficiency. "Try to get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow is another day, and the sun has a way of making the night's demons seem less fearsome." After she left, Katherine remained perched on the edge of Heath's bed, reluctant to leave him alone with his thoughts. "Will you be all right?" she asked softly. Heath managed a small, tired smile. "Eventually. Go back to bed, Kat. You have school in the morning." "I could stay," she offered, propriety be damned. "Just until you fall asleep." Heath shook his head. "Mrs. Abernathy would have both our hides. Besides," he added with a hint of his old humor, "if word got out that the schoolteacher was spending nights in a man's bedroom, you'd be out of a job faster than I could say scandal." Katherine smiled reluctantly. "I suppose you're right. But if you need anything, I know where to find you," he finished for her. "Good night, Kat, and thank you." Katherine rose, impulsively leaning down to press a kiss to his forehead. "Sleep well." As she returned to her own room, Katherine found herself thinking about Mrs. Abernathy's words. Finding purpose seemed key to Heath's recovery, something to focus on beyond his wounds and memories, something to give meaning to the life he'd fought so hard to keep. But what that purpose might be remained unclear. Heath was right about his limited options with his injured hand. Silver Creek wasn't a large town, and jobs that didn't require physical labor were few and far between. Tomorrow, Katherine decided as she slipped back into bed, she would speak to Dr. Wilson. Perhaps he would have suggestions for work that might suit Heath's abilities. For now, though, she needed rest. Tomorrow would indeed be another day with its own challenges and opportunities. Morning dawned clear and bright, the nightmare's shadows receding in the golden light that streamed through Katherine's windows. She dressed quickly, hearing Mrs. Abernathy moving about in the kitchen, the comforting sounds of breakfast being prepared. Heath was already at the table when Katherine entered the kitchen, looking tired but composed. He'd shaved and combed his hair, the simple grooming making him appear more like his old self despite the scars that would never fade. "Good morning," she greeted him, trying for normalcy after the intimacy of the night before. "Morning," Heath replied, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mrs. Abernathy's been telling me about your garden, says it needs a man's touch to get it ready for planting." The older woman snorted as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Katherine. "What it needs is someone with a strong back who knows which end of a hoe to hold. My arthritis won't let me do it anymore, and Katherine here barely has time between teaching and keeping house." Katherine recognized the opening Mrs. Abernathy was providing a chance for Heath to feel useful, to contribute to the household that had taken him in. "It's true," she said, picking up the thread. "I've been meaning to prepare the soil for weeks now, but there never seems to be time." "I could take a look at it today," Heath offered, his expression brightening slightly at the prospect of purposeful work. "My side's feeling better and I could use some fresh air." "Don't overdo it," Katherine cautioned. "Dr. Wilson said you still need to rest." "I'll just turn a bit of soil," Heath promised. "Nothing strenuous." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "The tools are in the shed out back, and there's a straw hat of Mr. Evans that should keep the sun off your face." The domestic scene felt so natural that Katherine's heart ached with longing. This is how it could be, she thought as she finished her breakfast. The three of them around the table each morning, sharing the day's plans, building a life together. But she knew better than to rush. Heath was still healing, still finding his way back to himself. For now, it was enough that he was here, that he was trying. After breakfast, Katherine headed to the schoolhouse, leaving Heath in Mrs. Abernathy's capable hands. Throughout the day, as she guided her students through their lessons, her thoughts kept returning to him, wondering how he was faring, whether the physical labor would prove too much for his healing body, whether the nightmares would return when darkness fell again. When school dismissed, Katherine hurried home, her steps quickening as she neared her house. The sight that greeted her in the backyard made her pause, a lump forming in her throat. Heath was kneeling in the garden plot, his shirt sleeves rolled up, dirt streaking his forearms as he carefully worked the soil. Mrs. Abernathy sat in a chair nearby, shelling peas and offering occasional direction. The scene was so peaceful, so ordinary, that for a moment Katherine could almost forget the scars, the nightmares, the long separation that had changed them both. Heath looked up at her approach, shielding his eyes against the late afternoon sun. A genuine smile lit his face, the first she'd seen since his return, that reached all the way to his eyes. "I hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the turned earth before him. "I got carried away. The soil here is good, rich and dark. Should grow just about anything you want to plant." "It looks wonderful," Katherine replied, setting down her school satchel and moving closer to inspect his work. "I had no idea you knew so much about gardening." Heath shrugged, a touch of self-consciousness crossing his features. "My mother taught me before she died. Said growing things was good for the soul." He looked down at the dirt on his hands, then back at the freshly turned plot. She was right. There's something healing about it, knowing something new can grow where there was nothing before. Katherine felt the significance of his words, the metaphor he might not even realize he was making. "We could plant vegetables," she suggested. "And maybe some flowers along the borders. Marigolds keep the pests away and they're cheerful." "Sounds perfect," Heath agreed, rising to his feet with only a slight wince. "I found some seedlings Mrs. Abernathy had started in the shed. We could put them in tomorrow if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Katherine said softly. Their eyes met over the garden plot, and for a moment, all the complications fell away: Harold Parker's threats, the town's gossip, the uncertain future. They were simply a man and a woman planning a garden together, and in that simplicity lay a profound hope. The moment was broken by Mrs. Abernathy's practical voice. "If you two are done making eyes at each other over the dirt, supper's nearly ready. Heath, go wash up. Katherine, come help me set the table." They both laughed, the spell broken but not the connection it had forged. As Heath headed for the pump to wash the garden soil from his hands and arms, Katherine followed Mrs. Abernathy into the kitchen, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The next week settled into a pattern that felt increasingly natural. Heath spent his mornings working in the garden, carefully planting the seedlings and preparing new beds for direct sowing. The physical labor seemed to do him good, strengthening his body and calming his mind. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and with decreasing intensity. In the afternoons, he often walked to the schoolhouse to accompany Katherine home, much to the fascination of her students, who regarded the scarred veteran with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Heath handled their questions with patient good humor, never flinching from their innocent inquiries about his scars or his experiences. "Were you scared in the war?" 10-year-old Billy Thompson asked one afternoon as they walked back to Katherine's house. "Every day," Heath answered honestly. "Only fools aren't scared in battle." "Then why did you stay and fight?" the boy persisted. Heath considered the question seriously. "Because there are things worth being scared for, things worth fighting for even when you're afraid." "Like what?" Billy pressed. Heath's eyes found Katherine's as he replied, "Like freedom, like home, like the people you love." The simple answer seemed to satisfy the boy, who ran ahead to join his friends, leaving Heath and Katherine to walk in companionable silence for a while. "You're good with them," Katherine observed. "The children," Heath shrugged. "They ask honest questions. It's refreshing after the adults who stare but don't dare to ask." It was true, Katherine reflected. While some townspeople had been welcoming of Heath's return, others kept their distance, unsure how to interact with the changed man who had come back to them. The children, with their natural curiosity and lack of preconception, treated him simply as he was a man with interesting stories and visible reminders of his courage. "Have you ever thought about teaching?" Katherine asked suddenly, the idea forming even as she spoke it. Heath looked at her in surprise. "Teaching me? Why not?" she pressed. "The school board has been talking about expanding, hiring another teacher for the older students. You're educated, you're good with children, and you have experiences that could be valuable to them." Heath's expression turned thoughtful. "I never considered it. Do you really think the school board would hire someone like me? Someone like you, a war hero with a proper education who connects well with children?" "They'd be fools not to," Katherine replied firmly, though she knew the reality might be more complicated, especially with Harold Parker's influence on the board. The seed of the idea had been planted, however, and Katherine watched it take root in Heath's mind over the coming days. She caught him reading her teaching manuals in the evenings, asking questions about her methods and curriculum. When she brought home essays to grade, he offered to help, revealing a surprising aptitude for spotting grammatical errors and encouraging young writers. The change in him was subtle but significant. Having a purpose, a potential direction, seemed to ground him. The restlessness that had sometimes shadowed his eyes began to recede, replaced by a focused determination that reminded Katherine of the boy he had been always planning, always looking toward the future. Not everyone was pleased with Heath's increasing integration into Silver Creek life, however. Harold Parker made his displeasure known in small but pointed ways, arranging for the mercantile to accidentally lose orders Katherine placed, ensuring Heath's application for a hunting permit was repeatedly delayed, spreading whispers about the propriety of their living arrangement, despite Mrs. Abernathy's presence. The situation came to a head on a Saturday morning in early May, nearly 3 weeks after Heath's return. Katherine and Heath were at the mercantile, purchasing seeds for the next phase of their garden planting, when Harold entered with several of his friends. "Well, if it isn't Silver Creek's most talked-about couple," Harold drawled, loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "Planning to put down roots, Mitchell? Or is gardening just a way to pass the time until you move on again?" Heath tensed beside Katherine but kept his voice level as he replied, "I believe I've made my intentions to stay quite clear, Parker." "Have you?" Harold countered, moving closer. "Because the way I hear it, most war veterans can't settle anywhere for long, too restless, too haunted." He tapped his temple meaningfully. "Too damaged in the head." A murmur ran through the other customers in the store. Katherine felt heat rising to her cheeks, anger building in her chest at Harold's deliberate cruelty. "That's enough, Harold," she said firmly. "Your grievance is with me, not Heath. I made my choice clear weeks ago." Harold's expression darkened. "Your choice is based on childish sentimentality and misplaced loyalty. Mitchell here can barely take care of himself, let alone provide for a woman. What kind of future can he offer you?" "That's between Katherine and me," Heath said, his voice deceptively calm though Katherine could feel the tension radiating from him. "I'd appreciate it if you'd leave her out of whatever problem you have with me." Harold stepped closer, deliberately invading Heath's personal space. "My problem is that you came back when everyone was better off thinking you were dead. Especially Katherine. She was moving on, building a respectable life. Now look at her living with a cripple, risking her reputation and her career." The mercantile had gone silent, every ear straining to catch the confrontation unfolding before them. Katherine saw the storekeeper nervously fingering the shotgun he kept beneath the counter. "I'm going to say this once, Parker," Heath said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Walk away now before one of us does something we'll regret." Harold smirked, clearly believing he had the upper hand. "Are you threatening me, Mitchell? That wouldn't be wise. One word from me, and you'd find yourself unwelcome in every establishment in Silver Creek." "I'm not threatening," Heath clarified. "I'm advising, as someone who's seen what happens when men let pride and jealousy push them too far." Harold's face flushed with anger. "You dare lecture me on pride? You, who crawled back to town with nothing but scars and nightmares to show for your grand adventure. At least I built something while you were away, Mitchell. What have you created besides a burden for Katherine to bear?" Something in Heath snapped at those words. Not in the way Harold clearly hoped. There was no violent outburst, no confirmation of the unstable veteran narrative he was trying to create. Instead, Heath's expression cleared, as if a decision long in the making had finally crystallized. "You're right about one thing, Parker," he said quietly. "Katherine deserves more than I've been able to offer her, but that changes today." He turned to Katherine, taking her hands in his before the assembled onlookers. "I've been waiting to do this until I had something solid to offer you. A job, a home of my own. But I realize now that waiting is just another form of fear, and I promised myself I was done letting fear rule my choices." Katherine's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "Katherine Evans," Heath continued, his voice steady and sure, "I've loved you since we were children. I carried that love through every battle, every hardship. It was what kept me alive when I had nothing else to hold on to. I know I'm not the same man who left, and I know the road ahead won't be easy. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day working to be worthy of you, to build a life that honors the faith you've shown in me." He lowered himself carefully to one knee, wincing slightly but never breaking eye contact. "Will you marry me, Kat? Not someday, not when everything's perfect, but now as we are, with all our scars and hopes and dreams." The mercantile was utterly silent, every person frozen in place as they waited for Catherine's answer. Even Harold seemed stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes, her heart so full it might burst. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Heath Mitchell, I will marry you now as we are with all that entails." Heath rose to his feet and, heedless of their audience, Katherine threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love and certainty she felt. The mercantile erupted in applause and cheers, all except for Harold Parker, who stormed out, his face dark with thwarted rage. As Heath and Katherine broke apart, breathless and laughing, the storekeeper approached with a broad smile. "Well, I think this calls for a celebration. The first bottle of champagne is on the house for Silver Creek's newest engaged couple." More cheers greeted this announcement, and suddenly they were surrounded by well-wishers, neighbors, friends, even people who had kept their distance since Heath's return, now coming forward to congratulate them and shake his hand. In the midst of the impromptu celebration, Katherine caught Heath's eye over the crowd. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "You don't have to do this to prove anything to Harold or anyone else." Heath's smile was more reminiscent of the carefree boy she'd known than anything she'd seen since his return. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied. "I've wasted too much time already. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you by my side, officially and permanently." Katherine smiled through happy tears. "Then let's not waste any more time." And they didn't. With Mrs. Abernathy's enthusiastic help, plans for a simple but lovely June wedding came together quickly. Judge Parker himself, perhaps in a gesture of reconciliation for his son's behavior, offered to perform the ceremony in the town square, under the large oak tree where Heath and Katherine had first pledged their childhood devotion to each other 15 years earlier. The weeks leading up to the wedding brought changes for both of them. Katherine formally applied for the position of head teacher at the expanding school, a role that would allow her to hire and supervise a second teacher. Heath, meanwhile, approached the school board directly, making his case for a teaching position focusing on older students, with particular emphasis on history and mathematics. To everyone's surprise except Katherine's, the board agreed to consider him, contingent on a demonstration lesson. The day of Heath's teaching audition arrived just a week before the wedding. Katherine, excused from her own classroom to observe, sat at the back of the room as Heath stood before her 12 students, his initial nervousness giving way to confidence as he engaged them in a lesson about the Civil War that balanced historical facts with personal insights. "History isn't just names and dates in a book," he told the captivated children. "It's made by real people with hopes and fears just like yours. Understanding that is how we learn from the past instead of just memorizing it." By the end of the hour, even the most skeptical board member was nodding in approval. They voted unanimously to offer Heath the position starting in the fall term, with a summer to prepare his curriculum and order necessary books and supplies. "Congratulations, Professor Mitchell," the board chairman said, shaking Heath's hand. "I believe you'll bring a valuable perspective to our school." As they walked home together afterward, Heath seemed lighter than Katherine had ever seen him since his return. "I never thought I'd find my purpose in a classroom," he admitted. "I always assumed I'd work with horses or the land." "You still could eventually," Katherine pointed out. "Many teachers farm during the summer months, and we could certainly afford a few acres outside town on 2 teaching salaries." Heath smiled, squeezing her hand. "One step at a time. For now, I'm just grateful to have a chance to be useful again, to build something instead of destroying." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and warm, a perfect early June day. Katherine stood in her bedroom, Mrs. Abernathy, fussing with the simple white dress they had worked on together. It wasn't elaborate by Eastern standards, but the fine cotton fabric draped beautifully, and the hand-embroidered flowers along the neckline and hem gave it a special touch. "Your mother would be so proud," Mrs. Abernathy said, her eyes misty as she adjusted Catherine's veil. "Both your parents would." "I wish they could be here," Katherine admitted, the day's joy tinged with the bittersweet absence of those she had lost. "They are, in their way," the older woman assured her. "In the home they built for you, in the strength they gave you, in the love they taught you to recognize and value." A knock at the front door interrupted their moment. Mrs. Abernathy hurried to answer it, returning moments later with a small package. "For you, from Heath," she explained, handing it to Katherine. "He said to give it to you before the ceremony." Katherine unwrapped the package carefully, gasping softly when she saw what lay inside, a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Opening it, she found a tiny photograph of Heath in his uniform, taken before he left for war, his young face untouched by the scars and experiences that would change him forever. A note accompanied the gift, written in Heath's careful hand. "My dearest Katherine, this was my mother's locket. I carried it through the war, adding my photograph in hopes that someday I might give it to you as I do today. Let it be a reminder that while time and circumstance may change our outsides, what truly matters remains constant. The boy in this picture loved you with all the innocent passion of youth. The man waiting for you under the oak tree loves you with the tested strength of one who has lost and found himself again through you. All my love, today and always." Heath's tears blurred Katherine's vision as she clasped the locket around her neck. It rested perfectly in the hollow of her throat, a tangible connection to both past and future. "Ready, my dear?" Mrs. Abernathy asked gently. Katherine nodded, gathering her small bouquet of wildflowers and garden blooms. "More than ready." The short walk to the town square seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. As Katherine approached the oak tree, she saw that nearly the entire town had turned out for the occasion, filling the benches and chairs set up in neat rows. Even those who had initially been skeptical of Heath's return, and their relationship had come around, won over by his quiet dignity and the evident depth of their love. Dr. Wilson stood near the front, beaming with the satisfaction of a physician who had healed more than just physical wounds. The schoolchildren had formed an informal honor guard along the path, the girls strewing flower petals before Katherine's feet. And then she saw Heath, standing tall beside Judge Parker under the spreading branches of the oak tree. He wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, his hair neatly trimmed, his scarred face transformed by the smile that bloomed across it as he caught sight of her. In that moment, Katherine saw everything at once: the carefree boy who had taught her to fish in the creek, the serious young man who had gone off to war with ideals and courage, the wounded soldier who had fought his way back to her, and the man who now waited to pledge his life to hers. All of them were Heath, and all of them were hers to love. As she reached him, taking his outstretched hands, one whole, one scarred, both strong and gentle, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. "You look beautiful," Heath whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "So do you," she replied simply. Judge Parker cleared his throat, beginning the ceremony with words of welcome and reflection on the nature of love and commitment. Katherine heard them distantly, her focus entirely on Heath's face, on the love and wonder reflected there. When the time came for their vows, Heath spoke first, his voice steady and sure. "Katherine Evans, I stand before you today a man remade by war and love, broken, healed, and stronger at the mended places. I bring to you a heart that has known darkness, but found its way back to light through your unwavering faith. I promise to honor that faith every day of our lives together, to cherish you in times of joy and support you in times of sorrow, to build with you a home filled with love, understanding, and hope. This I vow, with all that I am and all that I will become. Katherine blinked back tears as she offered her own promises in return. Heath Mitchell, I choose you today with clear eyes and a full heart, knowing both the boy you were and the man you've become. I promise to walk beside you through whatever paths life opens before us, to face each challenge as partners and equals, to nurture the love we've found against all odds, and to remind you whenever you forget of your own strength and worth. In you, I have found my home, my heart, my future. This I vow, now and always. Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife with evident emotion in his voice. As Heath leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, the assembled townspeople erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Mitchell, Heath murmured against her lips, his eyes bright with joy and unshed tears. Mr. Mitchell, Katherine replied, her heart too full for more elaborate words. Hand in hand, they turned to face their community as husband and wife, the future stretching before them, not perfect, not without challenges, but faced together, with love that had survived separation, war, and the wounds both visible and hidden that life inflicts on all who dare to live and love deeply. 3 years later, Katherine sat on the porch of their small farmhouse just outside Silver Creek, watching as Heath taught their 18-month-old son, Thomas, to toddle across the yard. The little boy, named for Mrs. Abernathy's late husband, had Heath's dark hair and Katherine's determined spirit, evidenced by the way he kept getting up after each tumble. "That's it, Tommy," Heath encouraged, his scarred hands ready to catch the boy if needed. "You've got it. Come to Papa." Katherine smiled, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach where their second child grew. Their life together wasn't without its difficulties. Heath still had nightmares occasionally, though they came less frequently now. And there were days when the phantom pain in his damaged hand made teaching challenging. But they had built something beautiful from the broken pieces the war had left them. The school where they both taught continued to thrive, with Heath's history classes becoming particularly popular among the older students. Their small farm, worked on evenings and weekends and throughout the summer months, provided much of their food and a modest additional income from the vegetables and flowers Katherine sold in town. Mrs. Abernathy still lived with them, now more grandmother than chaperone, her wise counsel and practical help invaluable as they navigated the challenges of marriage, careers, and parenthood. She sat beside Katherine now, her knitting needles clicking steadily as she worked on a blanket for the coming baby. "He's a natural father," the older woman observed, nodding toward Heath and Tommy. "Some men take to it like ducks to water." "He is," Katherine agreed, her heart full as she watched them together. "I think it heals something in him, being able to give Tommy the childhood innocence he lost." Heath looked up then, catching her gaze across the yard. The love in his eyes, undiminished by time or familiarity, still had the power to take her breath away. He scooped Tommy up in his arms, making the boy giggle with delight, and started toward the porch. "I think someone's ready for his afternoon nap," Heath announced, climbing the steps to join them. "He's been running me ragged." "I'll take him," Mrs. Abernathy offered, setting aside her knitting and holding out her arms for the drowsy toddler. "You two enjoy a moment of peace while you can. Once this new one arrives, quiet moments will be even rarer." As the older woman carried Tommy inside, Heath settled onto the porch swing beside Katherine, his arm coming naturally around her shoulders. She leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Happy?" he asked softly, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair. Katherine smiled, turning to meet his gaze. "Completely." "You?" Heath's expression grew thoughtful, his eyes looking beyond their peaceful yard to some middle distance only he could see. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life," he admitted. "After everything, to end up here with you, with Tommy and the baby coming, it feels like more than I deserve." "It's exactly what you deserve," Katherine corrected him gently. "What we both deserve after everything." Heath's scarred hand came to rest protectively over hers where it lay on her growing belly. "I used to think the scars were a reminder of everything I'd lost," he said quietly. "Now I see they're also a map of how I found my way back to you, to myself, to this life we've built." Katherine turned her face up to his, kissing him with all the tenderness and passion that had only deepened with time and shared experience. "I love you, Heath Mitchell," she whispered against his lips, "scars and all." "And I love you, Katherine Mitchell," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for seeing the man behind the scars, and loving both the boy I was and the man I've become." As the afternoon sun bathed their porch in golden light, they sat together in comfortable silence. Looking out over the life they had created, a testament to the healing power of love that recognizes worth beneath the wounds, that kisses scars as tenderly as unmarked skin, that sees beyond the damage to the heart that beats, steadfast and true, beneath.